We've already formed a quorum, so please invite the witnesses to come in.
Đó.
Yes, we can formally start. Mr. Yao and your colleagues, I won't introduce you one by one. Today you're representing the Bureau Director, right? So would you please ask the Bureau Director on behalf of me? David and your colleagues, I won't introduce you one by one. This is the first meeting in the year of the Ram. This is the meeting of the Public Accounts Committee. So I wish you good health and every success in the new year. Let us wish that the officials won't need to come so many times. So I wish you every success in your work. Now today we're on Chapter 4 of Report number 63. Chapter 4 is about the administration of the air traffic control and related services. We've already convened 4 meetings on this chapter. On the 11th of February, we already submitted to the Legislative Council our report on chapters 1, 2, and 3. As for Chapter 4, we would like to have more time to understand the details. So, there's no urgency to submit a report on this chapter before the 11th of February. Thank you very much for coming. You've come 4 times already. This is the 5th time. We had 2 meetings in December and 2 more meetings in January. And now this is March. This is our 5th meeting. Well, maybe after a long holiday, and given that this is a public hearing, I would like the clerk to go through the questions that we've asked about Chapter 4 and what Chapter 4 is all about. In particular, air traffic control is very important to Hong Kong, including aviation safety. Clark, well, very briefly, on Chapter 4 of Report number 3 of the Director of Audit, we had got 4 meetings. So I'd like to go through the salient points. For the accommodation of the air traffic control and related services, we had public hearings. On the 5th, the Civil Aviation Department obtained $50 billion for upgrading the ATC system, scheduled to be commissioned in October 2011. However, the warranty period would have expired in 2012. The system had not yet been commissioned. It's now scheduled to be commissioned in 2016. There are 8 major contracts, 7 of which had by and large been completed. But for the development of the ATC system, there's slippage, costing $460 million and also $80 million for variations to the contracts. The date of commissioning had been postponed from June 2013 to a later date for the management items and related services, including the development of the AT systems that been serious slippage, the procedures for tendering, the vetting procedures, the existing ATC system, and requirements for the new systems and the comparisons between them, the basis of the 2 rounds of contracts, and the regulatory authority. Over $100 million had been spent on the runway monitoring radar system. Ever since its commissioning in January 2001, it had not been used to support the flight movements. So the original objectives had not been duly attained. Now this radar system, starting from January 2005, had been in a standby mode. Well, before we ask questions, our lead member today is Mr. Kenneth Leung. He will be the first to ask questions. Before he does so, may I ask whether there's any declaration of interest? Your previous declarations are still valid. And besides, for the administration, we wrote to you a number of times, and some of the documents had to be kept confidential. Well, if you're not responding, we may pursue our questions, and if we consider that the information provided by you is not enough, we may exercise our powers to seek those information. So it's up to you to decide on what documents you're going to submit to us. So, Mr. Yao, the Undersecretary, would you please pay attention to this when you answer our questions? And during the holiday, we received quite many views on this issue. Some information may not be included in our report, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to ask those questions on behalf of those who submitted the views to us, because all of us would like to do this job well. So, Mr. Kenneth Leung, you can ask your questions now. You have 20 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like members to focus on part 2 of this chapter, because the other parts have by and large been completed. That is, we'd like to focus our questions on the management of the new ATC system project. The last meeting was held more than a month ago. Maybe we need to refresh our memory on a number of issues. Maybe we should do some warm-up first. May I refer you to Chapter 4, page 13. Which paragraph are you on? Well, it's Table 3, on page 14 of the English version. I'd like to ask a general question. what is the difference between stage 1 and stage 2? Is it that after stage 1, the ATC3 can be included? If you don't have an accurate target or completion date for stage 1, then how can you proceed? So what's the difference between phase 1 and phase 2? Why do you need to have two phases? Mr. Norman Low, or who would like to answer the question? Would you please speak louder? We can't hear you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For phase 1, basically, the system could be used in the main center for operation. The system itself can, in terms of software and other aspects, support our backup system. As for the backup system, is actually an operating ATC system. So in phase 1, when the operation was smooth, after testing we found no problem, then the hardware and software, some software in AT1 were modified. And then in phase 2, in accordance with our backup ATC system, we would reinstate the hardware. Yet, most of the software was completed in the main ATC system. Kenneth, I understand from the DG's answer that in phase 1 in the mainframe you would put in AT3, but there's no backup. You said that you couldn't come up with the backup because in phase 2 the software and hardware would be backed up by using AT1. So you had the mainframe for AT3 in phase 1. So during that operational stage, what is the backup? Then for this CT3, an advanced system is to be used as the mainframe and to use the old AT1 as backup. Was this the international practice in general? So if one is to serve as the backup of the other, is it that both systems have to be as advanced as each other? DG? Well, the systems were all right. There were no problems. In phase 1, if we had conducted all tests and came to the view that the system could be used, then phase 1 would be considered as being completed. As for AT1 and its operations, we now have a backup center. Although the backup center is not as large as the future one for AT3, still we have a backup center at the moment. Well, after the commissioning of AT3, the existing one would be dismantled. But before that's done, the backup system for AT1 would be modified as the backup system for AT3 first. Although the scale will not be as big as the genuine backup system for AT3, still we will have the backup functions. Kenneth, my question is, the mainframe, well, before you got AT3, you would use AT1 for the time being. Well, was phase 1 really all right? I'm not saying that the systems could not operate independently, but if AT3 is not all right, even though AT1 can independently operate, then will there be interfacing problems? That is, after one system is down, how long would you have to wait before the backup system can start? And you had communication problems with neighboring jurisdictions. All right, you said you had a very good mainframe. But if it breaks down, can the backup system immediately pick up all the data and operate? Have you tested the system? Am I correct to understand that you were saying that both the mainframe and the backup system were operating smoothly? Well, there would not be any interfacing when the new system replaces the old one. If the mainframe is down, if there are problems, then the fallback system will automatically pick up the operations. Even if there are major problems in the software, in the ultimate backup software will be able to rectify the inadequacies. So there are several layers of safeguard. You haven't gone to the backup for a fallback yet, because even if the backup system and the fallback system are independently all right, if the three systems are not fully linked up, how can you say that if the mainframe fails, you have the backup and then the fallback? Before you link up the three systems, that is, before you've tested for synchronization, how can you tell us that there are no problems? I think you should at least conduct dozens of tests first. Although I'm a layman, I believe I'm still able to comment like this. DG, well, maybe I did not make myself clear enough. If the mainframe is all right, then the mainframe, the backup system, and the fallback system would be all right. Well, for the AT3, you have the software, the hardware, the backup system, the fallback system, and the ultimate fallback system. You have this independent system. But you explained to us that AT1 and AT3 are two different systems. Then we might be confused. His question is about AT1 and AT3. If you use AT1 to back up AT3, is it necessary to do so? So you have to explain yourself in clearer terms. In 2007, you came to electrical for funding. You said that by the end of 2012, the AT1 would reach the end of its lifespan. And now you tell us the AT1 was to be used as the backup. Would you please make yourself clearer? Well, you have so many documents here. Whenever you answer questions, would you please think thoroughly, carefully first before you answer? Well, we're not experts, so it's very difficult for us to learn all these things because all of you here are experts. You should explain everything to us. DG, well, maybe I should try to explain a little bit further. For AT3 with both software and hardware, for the hardware, for the software in phase 1, we had basically commissioned all the matching software. That's in the mainframe, plus the fallback system, plus an ultimate fallback system, insofar as software is concerned. Why did I say that by and large we had completed the commissioning? Because we can always expand these systems. It depends on how many pieces of hardware you link to the software. We have assistant posts and other posts who need software and hardware support. If we got the mainframe in phase 1, then the fallback and ultimate fallback systems would be considered as being totally commissioned. We conducted all the tests.
第一個
Mr. Leung said that when there are problems with the main system, it will be switched to the backup system. And if failing that, there will be software to switch to the ultimate fallback system. That is the operation. When the main control center is in operation, well, we have actually designated a small control center as a backup center. The hardware has been installed, put in place. If it's not software or hardware problem, if it's problem with the with other things, say for example a fire or an explosion, and the center can't be physically used, then we have to move to a contingency or backup center. We have already put that in place. And it's only when we have put everything in place that AT1 will be changed. It will be changed to a larger backup for AT3. We do that because the existing AT1 and the existing backup were put in place over a dozen years ago. And at that time, aircraft movement was a lot lower and air traffic was a lot smaller in volume. We have to put in place a sizable backup to cope with a higher percentage of aircraft movement. So the AT1 main center will be changed to the backup center of AT3. That's what it is. I hope Mr. Leung will understand. I do, but I don't. I know that after 2025, you said that the mainframe hardware software will be an AT3 as the main system. You said there is a backup system housed in a contingency center. I do understand that. The backup software is derived from AT1 because you need a backup system with a larger capacity. Is that what is going to happen in 2025? Is that what you mean, DG? If I understand it correctly, that's not what I meant. What I meant was when we're using AT3, and after all the tests is proved to be operational, the backup center of AT3 and the systems will be derived from AT3. That means you don't need AT1, right? But when you explained, you said that AT1 will be switched to a fallback center. But that's not what you said in the FC document, and you've never said that before this time. No, not AT1, but the existing air traffic control center. Oh, you only talk about the premises, but we were talking about AT1 and AT3. Yeah, I do know that the site and the software are two different things. Let me clarify. At the end of phase 1, you will have an ultimate fallback system and a mainframe. I don't care about your physical location. I don't care how many locations you have. I'm talking about your software and your hardware. It will be a seamless AT3 system. Is that right or not? That is at the end of phase 1. Mainframe, backup, and ultimate fallback will be using AT3 or a derivative of AT3. Am I right? Don't explain, just say whether it's right or not. As far as I understand, that's right. Okay, after phase 1, you will have a very good system. Then what are you going to do in phase 2, and how long will it take? I don't understand why there is a phase 2, DG. I mentioned briefly about this, but perhaps I wasn't clear. Well, that is the expandability of the system. In phase 1, we worked on the control center, including software and hardware. For hardware, they are the air traffic control officers and related posts. I think there are about 40 to 50 of such posts. We'll have phase 2 because we would like to have a backup center, and the location of the backup center is of some distance from the AT3 center. Where is the future backup center be? It will be the existing ATC center. After we've tested AT3 to find that it's safe and operational, we will move all the hardware and change all the hardware in the existing center to be something that is compatible with AT3. That's why we have this phase 2. Kenneth. Yes. So it's going to be a new building to expand the capacity of the system and the hardware. If that is the case, why do you still use AT1? Why not use a derivative of AT3? Why do you use an AT1? What's the reason? Sorry, I wasn't clear. Not AT1, still AT3. But you said AT1. That's why Mr. Leung misunderstood you, and I did too. Perhaps I'll ask a supplementary. Has phase 1 been completed? Because according to the contract, well, it will take 60 to 65 weeks for phase 1 to be completed, and then phase 2 will start. So, at what stage are you under phase 1? The contract date of phase 1, that is on the date when it was signed, is June 2013. Phase 2 is December 2013. So in answer to the chairman's question, for phase 1, we are still at SAT, that is Site Acceptance Tests. And at the beginning of that, we found that there are areas of concern. And we're currently talking with the supplier to overcome these, to address these areas of concern. We hope that in July or August we will have finished all the SATs. Kenneth. DG, let's refer to table 3. I don't understand because it says that is phase 1 and it should be completed on the 20th of December 2013. That's only phase 1. I don't see anything about phase 2. And just now you mentioned about June or some other months. So when is the actual contract date for phase 1 and phase 2? Please answer about the date first. Page 14, table 3. Perhaps I will defer to Mr. Lee, the Deputy DG. For phase 1, the original completion date was June 2013, but with CV2, the contract variation, the completion date has been extended to 20th of December 2013, as stated in Table 3. So has Phase 2 been extended as well? Can you tell me? for the phase 2 contract is rather flexible. We'll have to commence using the new system and the new control center, and we're satisfied that everything is in order and it functions normally before we change the existing system and existing control center. That will be phase 2. I don't understand. What do you mean change? If the backup is at a new site, so in phase 2, after the expansion, the entire system, I mean mainframe, backup and ultimate fallback, after phase 2, will there be any 81 elements, or are they all 83? DG. As far as we know, after phases 1 and 2, there won't be any 81 in it. Kenneth. So, everything you said about 81 was a slip of the tongue, because 81 will not be used after phase 2. Is that right? The mainframe, backup and ultimate fallback will be the brand new 83, right? DG. After phase 2, 81 no longer plays a role. When 81 is being used in the center, that means 81 is no longer needed. They will be dismantled and changed to an 83 compatible system for the bigger center. So the hardware will be moved to the new center, and the new center will use 83 center. That will be for phase 2, right? Absolutely. In the backup center and the main center, that is the operating centers will be using the same system, 83, in terms of hardware and software. Understand? You change the hardware and the software and the system to a new center and you'll be using 83. When will you test that? Because you have to move, and moving will take place after phase 1. So you test 80, the new system, and is it the case that you are able to test the new system in the new site? Will it affect the normal operation of the mainframe of 83? I don't know when you will do further testing. DG. Well, the move itself does not involve any software or hardware that is of 83 that is running. We only need to install some hardware that is compatible with 83 in the backup center. After that, of course, there will be data transfer. In phase 2, we will deal with that. I know. But my question was, there will be no time to do the tests, to do the testing. The whole thing, hardware or software, when they are installed in a new backup center, when will you do the tests? Because every day there will be over 1,000 aircraft movement. And the main system is being used in the new center, and you are moving the backup system, and you have to do the tests. How can you do everything? DG. Perhaps I will defer to the works department or engineering department. Mr. Wu? Thank you. For site acceptance tests under Phase 1, for the main control center, all the hardware and all the hardware of the future backup system will be tested. That is part of the acceptance tests. We want to test the hardware and software system of under Phases 1 and 2. After that is commissioned, after Phase 1, as the Deputy DG said, when we are satisfied that everything is running smoothly in the main center, that will take about half a year, then the Phase 2 hardware with these after these site acceptance tests will be moved to the backup center. It's only physically moving it because they've been tested. But you mentioned about testing the hardware. What about the software? What about the procedure involved in the move? You have to move something from the main center to the new place. It will take time. It may affect the operation of the main center. Yes, hardware might have been tested, but you have to test it again after they've been installed. It's just like you move a machine, you have to connect it, and you have to test it. And just now the DG talked about data transmission. You have to make sure that data is transmitted seamlessly, so that you know that the off-site backup system is functioning. I'm not happy with the answers. I will give time for other members to ask questions. Perhaps we'll hear the answer first, because it's very important. Please refer to Table 1, Note 1. It explains what is Phase 1 and Phase 2. It's page 8. In Note 1, it's clearly explained what are Phases 1 and 2. Phase 1 will take 6 months, and then there will be Phase 2. I think it'll be easier if you refer to this. Just now Mr. Leung asked you a very simple question, but your answers complicated the whole matter. If you don't give us an answer, it's very difficult for us to move forward. Page 8, Note 1. Refer to it to see if it helps. Well, at the end of Phase 1, it will be a new control center. After it's been operating for 6 months, we will go on to Phase 2. So for hardware and software, we would have accepted. And when it comes to tests, they've been tested under Phase 1, as Mr. Wu explained. For Phase 2, we will move some equipment to a center. The center will be using Pt1, but everything will be taken down. And this move will not affect the operation of the functioning system, because we don't have to take anything physically to move them to a different place. We only have to connect them to the mainframe, and then in Phase 2 we will be able to run the backup center.
So, Kenneth, for phase 1, 6 months after its successful implementation, they would start phase 2. And at present, phase 1 still hasn't been completed, is that right? I understand the flow. I understand. So that means after completing phase 1, there could be major problems with the system because you're only allowing yourself 6 months to see if there are any problems with the system. So if there are problems, what will be done? I don't know what you can do about it because the contract says that 6 months would be given for testing the system. Why is it that this is so crucial under Note 1? Perhaps I'll defer to Deputy DG Mr. Lee to take your question. I want to emphasize a point. Safety is of paramount importance. Our view is this. Regarding the 6 months, we may not even need to have 6 months. And yet, even after very detailed testing procedures, since the system is very complex, if we do not include this clause in the contract, we will not have this flexibility. Although we didn't expect any problems after a series of acceptance tests when the system is commissioned, we nevertheless would like to include this clause because the existing center can serve as the backup center. So it's a matter of protection. So that means here it says that it's in a contract that the system must run smoothly for 6 months before you start phase 2. It's clearly written in the contract, is that right? Mr. Lee? Well, if you're talking about the contract, I may need to defer to Mr. Wu. But our idea is that after the center is commissioned, there should be some buffer for us to ensure that the system is running smoothly before we dismantle the old system. Well, Mr. Wu, can you please take the question? Because you prepared the tender document, right? You took part in it, is that right? If so, why had this 6 months period been included? Mr. Wu, were you... Did you prepare the tender document? Yes, at the initial stage for the tender document, I took part in it. So can you answer Dr. Lang's question? Mr. Lee just now said that you might not need the 6 months. And because, so please explain why that part is included and what a higher score would be given as a result of that, because he designed the tender document. I think I can supplement a few points. As mentioned just now, aviation safety is our top priority. Whenever a new air traffic control center is commissioned, time is needed for one to observe and see if the system is running smoothly before you dismantle the old center, and that's the best practice. And in terms of timetable, we have proposed a 6 months period because from past experience, we would understand that there could be major problems, although the chance might be minimal. And nevertheless, we need to do some tests in accordance with the international aviation safety standards. So in the timetable, as far as the timetable is concerned, we put down tentatively 6 months after completion of phase 1 work. The reason is, as my colleague mentioned just now, after phase 1 is completed, the manufacturer would be required to move both hardware and software to the future backup center from the site. So we need 6 months for them to arrange for manpower to do so. Mr. Wu, I'm getting more and more confused as you speak. Now, you mentioned that you'd wait for 6 months for the system to be stable before you would dismantle the system. And you mentioned that by dismantling the system, you meant that both hardware and software would be moved to the backup center. And just now, Mr. Lee said that that is actually irrelevant. So why don't you install both hardware and software of AT3 in the new center in one go? I don't understand the workflow. I don't understand the testing process. Because you have AT3, AT1, you have hardware, and you have software. I'd like to know. And please describe to me every step that will be taken in phase 1 and phase 2. What I don't want to see is the lack of a backup system in phase 2. Can you draw up a table and tell us what happens 6 months after completion of phase 1 and completion of phase 2? And in the interim, what system would be used? I think there should be at least 3 columns in your table: mainframe, backup, and the ultimate fallback. I'd like you to give us a succinct table telling us the time frame and roughly how much time will you need to do that. DG, can you do that? Yes, we can. Oh, let me see. Maybe Macy Chang can also take this question for us. I'd like you to read Chen. You know, there was a letter written by you to the Central Tender Board. In Jan 10, in that letter, you explained phase 1 and phase 2. When you wrote them the letter to explain phase 1 and phase 2, you did the explanation, and then Dr. Leung would like to follow up on what will be done in phase 1 and phase 2. So please refer to your letter in Jan 10 and explain to us. Page 9, the letter to Central Tender Board. Macy, did you write this? Completion dates. So do you know what phase 1 and phase 2 actually entailed when you wrote this letter to the Central Tender Board in this letter? Can you answer Dr. Leung's question? Can you explain your recommendation? Oh, Chairman, I'll try, because the letter was written quite a number of years ago. Now, about the timetable. The schedule of the tender document set out the timetable and the work involved under phase 1 and phase 2. That means phase 1 should be completed within how many weeks, and also for phase 2, how many weeks would be required. And actually what was mentioned just now is set out in the timetable. 65 weeks for phase 1 and 30 weeks for phase 2. So on page 9 of this document, on page 9, when we talk about phase 1's and phase 2's completion dates, we only related the timetable set out in the tender document. So can you refer us to the tender document's timetable? Is in Annex 4. That is page 26 of page 70. Annex 5. Annex 5 of the tender document.
附表4係 implementation plan。
Well, Annex 4 is implementation plan. Page 26. 1.15. It says completion date, phase 1, ATMS, 65 weeks. And then starting from 1.15A to 1.21, that those are in general the requirement of 30 weeks for phase 2. And our understanding is that when ATM3 mainframe software, hardware have been completed, there will be 6 months for them to ensure stability of the system, and then there will be a series of tests, and then the existing air traffic control center will be used as the backup center, and there'll be more tests and conversion of the center into a backup center, and the procedures will go under phase 2. That's 1.15A to 1.21. So in the tender document, page 9, para 18, phase 1, phase 2, those paragraphs described the time frame for phase 1 and phase 2, 65 weeks for phase 1 and 30 weeks for phase 2, and what work will be involved. All right, allow another question. I just wonder why the CAD is unable to answer the question. And this is the information that you've given to the Director of Logistics. Ms. Eleanor? No, Mr. Raymond Wong, you go first. We don't want to go back to the same issue again, so I've spent more time on this. Chairman? Well, about the papers received today, we have this reply. That is some questions put to the CAD through the Secretariat. Jan 13, is that right? Okay, let's look at Jan 13. Before I follow up on the issues, I'd like to say something. Undersecretary is here. Secretary is not here. When we first asked about this new ATC center, we said that the secretary should be responsible, and I mean the DG should be accountable to the secretary, and that secretary should not let you off lightly. And the secretary said no. Now, I think the two incidents, the LCSD and the CAD, these two incidents are really scandals. Even ICAC could initiate investigation into these cases. But since this is the Public Accounts Committee, our job is to ensure value for or to follow up on the value for money audit. But the responsibilities are very clear. The Director General of Civil Aviation and the Deputy Director General, well, you receive high salaries, you get promotion, you get pay rises, and you should be accountable. Well, Mr. Yao Sing-mo, Undersecretary, what is the THB doing? Last time you told us that you would not let them off lightly, and yet you are totally disregarding the PAC report. Even if they can't be sacked, at least they should not be promoted. This is outrageously unreasonable. DG, when will you retire? Well, DG's retirement has nothing to do with today's report. DG, you may answer. DG will retire very soon. The report has been released. He has been reprimanded, and yet he will just retire with pension payment. I want to, through this hearing, tell the public that our government officials need not be accountable for the mistakes they commit. They won't be penalized. Mr. Raymond Wong, let's wait for the report to be compiled first. Well, in fact, last time we already admitted that we actually have no power to penalize them. I mean, it's not our function to decide whether they should be penalized or not. Our job is value for money audit. But some issues do stand out. So shouldn't they be penalized for their mistakes, Undersecretary Mr. Yao? Now, in relation to Chapter 3, Secretary for Transport and Housing already mentioned that he would seriously follow up on the issues. So we are working on that. As for this chapter, I think we should respect the work of the PAC. No, you from this administration, you should explain to us that there is discipline in your administration. Now, with this case being scrutinized by PAC, it is impossible for you to promote them. Well, Raymond, I don't think they can answer your questions. All right, let me ask my questions. Regarding the second contract variation, we saw the reply in Jan 13 that the reasons for that, and there are a number of problems identified. For example, some problem with the training system, and a more advanced system should be introduced. And last time, DG told us in reply that nobody had been sent to the US for training, and the CAD had no objection of introducing the system, and then the engineers in CAD then tested the simulator and found a lot of problems. That was why there was a contract variation with money paid out to the manufacturer. That was the reply last time. And yet in the written reply in July 2012, without objection from the CAD, the contractor had delivered its equipment in July 2012. Why is it that all of a sudden the simulator became equipment? I am really puzzled. Does equipment mean simulator, or why is it changed from simulator to equipment? Well, in this context, simulator is actually the equipment. So why is it that last time you didn't tell us clearly what that simulator is? Well, if it's hardware, then just tell us it's hardware directly. Of course, I know a simulator must be hardware. It's not software. But your answers are not consistent. Your versions are not consistent. Last time, at one time you said it's simulator. The other time you said it's hardware or equipment. Now you said that they're just the same. Anyway, I'll stop here. They are just very confusing. Now, all the minutes of previous meetings are available, so do read them carefully. Well, you're in your answer, you mentioned simulator, and in fact, you could have clarified by saying that actually that meant the equipment. I just want to let you know that. So at that time, you received that equipment which could not be used, and that there were many deficiencies or observations outstanding, and yet you dared to ask a Radian to dispatch the equipment here. There are many people watching live this meeting, and by common sense we would agree that there is definitely a transfer of benefit. But in the PAC, this is not the judgment that will pass on you. This judgment will be passed by the public. And the CAD arranged for over 10 officers to undergo training in the U.S. That's according to the paper. But last time you mentioned that actually no officer had been sent. So which is true? I'll defer to Mr. Wu. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wong, for your question. Last time, the question was whether over 200 officers have been sent to the U.S. for training, and the answer is indeed negative. In fact, engineering staff related to the project went to the United States to undergo training regarding the system. In fact, those were engineers, not air traffic control officers.
As regards the second reason for modifying the contract is to comply with the ICAO's global... Well, would you please go back to the first contract first? They had 380... Well, I'll follow up on that later. Well, I think you should finish 1 first before you move on to 2. All right, you want me to go back to the first one? Yes, that's easier for us to follow you. Well, in fact, it doesn't matter. Even if I ask questions about the second one, that's about training, about ICAO's global requirement. Well, last time we said that they wasted over $10 million on that. Now, the CAD sent people to be trained on a system that had been discovered to be problematic, and they even asked for more money to improve that system. I don't think that's acceptable to us. DG, can you answer that question? Can Mr. Wong repeat his questions? Well, I'm not asking questions. I have a feeling, and the chairman asked whether or not you can respond to my feeling. Well, for that system, you sent 10-odd people to the United States to look at the hardware, and then you discovered problems. The problems were not resolved on the spot then, and the hardware was delivered to Hong Kong. And then in Hong Kong, you discovered even more problems, 1,000 problems. And more importantly, they had to pay more. Well, they revised the contract twice, and now we see that that's totally unnecessary. Why? You're stupid, you're confused, or you want to benefit Radian. Well, he wants you to explain your act. You have to explain that you're not stupid, you're not confused. You're not confused, you're not stupid. Then you wanted to benefit them. All right, now you went to the United States to look at the hardware. There are problems with the hardware. What did you do to solve the problems before the hardware was delivered to Hong Kong? Mr. Wu or Mr. Lee? Well, you have to explain this. If you don't explain this, we'll have a big question mark. We sent 10-odd colleagues to the United States to receive basic training on the system. That's totally not about operation. I'll defer to Mr. Wu for more details. Secondly, concerning the necessity to modify the contract, I'll defer to Mr. Lee later. But I'd like to emphasize one point. When we test and accept a system, it takes a few years. For the ATC system, we modified the contract thrice. In recent years, some of our neighboring jurisdictions had their contracts modified over 10 times before commissioning an operation. Yes, indeed, there was the need to modify the contract. Well, don't talk about foreign jurisdictions or other systems. We're not about Pt1 either, we're about Pt3. All right, you sent 10-odd people to the United States and they discovered some problems. Did you ever solve those problems before the hardware was delivered to Hong Kong? For the site test, if you did not accept the hardware, then the hardware would not have been delivered to Hong Kong. You have to answer that first before going to the modification of the contract. I defer to Mr. Wu. Where or when did those 10 odd people go to the United States? What did they discover? When was the hardware delivered to Hong Kong? And when did you discover 1,000 problems? Anything to do with VO? It's important for us to write a report, but this is not just for us. Outside, many people are also watching. Now you explain slowly because we have a great deal of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We sent 2 batches of people there. One batch went from early 2012 to mid 2012. They went there to receive training, not to test the system. For any new system, a lot of details have to be understood. For example, data matching, modification of the system, overall maintenance, etc. They had to understand the whole system first before they could test the system and accept the system. Well, some people attended a 2-week course. Well, some courses lasted 2 weeks, some 1 week. Altogether, there are 7 different courses with different trainees. Anyway, all these people were trained out of need for the system. Did they discover any problem? Or did they just attend the courses, take a cup of tea, have a bun, and that's it? If the system was not there, what's the purpose of the training? Would you please explain to Yok Man? Yok Man asked very clear questions. Now, these people were trained there. They attended classes. They also attended practicum sessions. They had to understand the system. They're not there to conduct factory tests. Well, eventually, the system failed. Well, some colleagues went there to accept the software. Well, did any of your colleagues tell you that during the training courses they discovered a lot of problems? After that, another batch of colleagues went mainly for the factory test. During the factory test, which lasts from June 2012 onwards, 204 factory acceptance tests. They recorded the items tested. In July 2012, the factory acceptance test failed. Then our colleagues came back and urged the manufacturer to improve the problematic items discovered. And then in May 2013, the tests were completed. Just now we said that in August 2012, the hardware was delivered to Hong Kong. Why? The manufacturer requested that the hardware be delivered to Hong Kong. On the basis of the terms in the contract, we said at that time that we would not object to the delivery, but if they delivered the hardware to Hong Kong, they would have to bear the risks. If here in Hong Kong, acceptance test failed, the system would be dismantled and all costs would have to be borne by them. Let me follow up on this. So that's a no liability agreement, right? You did not accept any liability. But actually, you knew that there are 204 problems. Your colleagues would not cheat you. Did they tell you that the 204 problems were solved? It's your responsibility as a senior official to follow up on those 204 problems. Well, I don't know whether it is 204 or 384. I read the figure somewhere. Well, if they delivered a piece of rubbish to Hong Kong, you're duty-bound to test it. The warranty period ended in 2013. So where's your responsibility? Did you ask whether the 204 problems were solved? Did your colleagues ask? Well, Mr. Chairman, your questions were very clear. Very simple. You sent a lot of people to the United States to be trained on a system that had a lot of problems. And then when the system was delivered, you put up a number of requests. Still, it did not work. We can only get angry with ourselves. Why did we give you $1.5 billion in the Finance Committee and the Transport and Housing Bureau supported you? Is this not unreasonable and irrational? Well, you told us that 90% of the problems were solved, only 10% remained, but those 10% of problems were related to safety. Did you follow up on those 10% of problems before you allowed them to deliver the system to Hong Kong for factory acceptance test? This is very important. This involves the whole contract. What about the logistics and procurement department? What about Ms. Cheng? Did you explain to her department that only 90% of the problems were solved? 10% were still outstanding. You're accountable to them. Did they accept your explanation? When the system was delivered to Hong Kong, did they know of these problems? In your reply, in the attachment to Gen 17, we got this figure of 90%. So Yukman was asking about that. We asked you repeatedly why you had to modify the contract twice. Well, to put it bluntly, you did not have to spend the $1.5 billion. It's totally stupid. Well, the DG loved to talk about the Delhi airport, and we asked a lot about Delhi airport as well. We asked our questions on the basis of information from a number of parties. All these added up to something very abhorrent. 83 operational conditions, and then the DG referred to the Delhi airport. I remember once he cited that an award had been given to them. That's only to put up a show. There's no essential relationship between this system and the Delhi system. And then it's discovered that Delhi airport used the software, not AT3, and before the Raytheon system, there's no record of an efficient system of this sort. And as early as 2011, tenderers already sued the SARG for cheating. I suspect that they're using software to mix all these up, and the professionals are trying to fool us laymen. Here you have so many engineers here. You use your professional jargons to hoax us, thinking that we don't understand. You mix things up, but if you look at each and every issues independently, you'll discover major problems. The DG said that for the Delhi airport, they had to handle 900 flights per day on the average, and for the Hong Kong airport, 1,100. So both airports are more or less as busy. But how is this related to the efficiency of the system? Number of flights handled per day, how is this relevant? It's just like a GDP is more or less the same for Japan and India. For China, its GDP ranks second in the world. Can you say that people's living standard in Japan and India are similar? Well, you have to look at the number of runways. Delhi operates round the clock. Ours operate 12 hours a day, 68 flights per hour. Delhi Airport, 30. Well, there's a huge discrepancy between the two if you really want to draw any comparison between the two airports. And then there's another issue that the DG has to respond. In CAD's response to the PAC, some figures were quoted, like the number of posts in the Air Traffic Control Center. 20 posts increased to 40 to 50. ATC center, including the backup system and the fallback system, 70 altogether, and later increased to 120, right? Old ATC center, very reasonable to have a mainframe. And then the ultimate fallback ATC center would get 100 posts. What does the air control tower do? To manage and control flights? So, how are all these related to the number of posts? And then in answering newspapers' questions and the PAC's questions, you put up very different answers. Why? Any discrepancies, any differences? DG, would you please explain to Yoke Man? Thank you for the question. Hong Kong's airport also operates round the clock. This is point number one. Number two, an AT system should reflect one thing. I asked about flights, landing and departing flights. Well, Hong Kong's airport operates round the clock. That is 24 hours a day. The number of movements do reflect the operations of the system. Two parts here. The big part, when airlines handle departing and landing flights, they have to handle flight schedules. So we need a processor for that. The number of movements in an airport can indicate the amount of traffic to be controlled by the processor. Number two, how many flights can this processor oversee? If the system is not sufficient to oversee all flights, then it's under capacity and there'll be operational difficulties. As for the air traffic control tower, how is it related to the air traffic control center? The tower is also an air management service body. The air traffic controllers are also our air traffic controllers. What are the differences? In terms of the systems, some data and information will be disseminated to our air traffic control center. So the data will pass from the main frame to the indicators. So in terms of calculation, we have to take into account the requirements of the air traffic control tower. As for the design, I'll defer to Mr. Wu. Mr. Wu?
Thank you. If you have the final specification, I would like to draw your attention to that. I'll refer to the content. In the final specification, clause 3.1, it says that the main system can accommodate 120 controller working position and supervisor positions. So the 120, they can be CPUs. You can see them as CPUs located at different locations. Apart from the 120, well, we have the information. We know the 120. You have answered us last time. But I want to talk about the allocation of the 120. Okay? But I don't want you to waste our time. For the 120, we're talking about the AT3, the new system. For the main control center, there are two groups of people: air traffic control officers and assistants. For the air traffic control officers, they are responsible for air traffic control. There will be about 40 to 50 at the control center. And at the control tower, there will be about a dozen CPUs. And in the control tower, there are assistants and controllers. These two locations are the main control center, the ATC centers. When we procure the equipment, we've included the backup center and the backup tower. So altogether, we're talking about 120. And this 120 also includes about rescue. In the tender document, you sometimes see 130, sometimes 120. 130, well, 120 refers to the 24-hour requirement of CPU in ATC. And for the remaining 10 is to support. They are supporting CPUs. Say, for example, during an accident investigation, they have to study the performance of air traffic controllers and the support system. They are directly related to the air traffic control system. That is H24, the 120, and the remaining 10 is for support. That explains the two figures. Mr. Wong, Gen 13, Annex 2. I see something. An email from Delhi. Criticism about AT3. You have deleted the entire paragraph, is that right? DG. Perhaps I will defer to Mr. Wu. Mr. Wu? There is no editing. Nothing has been edited out. We're talking about 2 pages. The second page is attached to the bottom. So there is nothing in between in that space there. Mr. Leung, but I still have one question. A couple, maybe. About lowering the penalty. When the contractor has caused a delay, the penalty has been decreased by 1.5%. For the existing ATMS, the lifespan will expire in 2017, and in 2007 the CAD asked for funding application. It was said that after the end of the lifespan, it can still be used. But how safe is it? But we're talking about a delay of 3 years. So we're actually flying in fear. No wonder Kenneth said that before this ATMS is fixed, he will not fly. But don't scare the public. Well, when you asked us for money, you said that it has to be replaced. It can't be delayed, but now there is a delay. But however, you don't raise the penalty or keep it at 15% so that they will meet the deadline so that we'll fly in safety. That's very unacceptable. You lower the penalty. You have completely neglected safety. When you come to us for money, you said that there is a short lifespan. DG. For the existing system, of course, we're very concerned about safety and its performance. When we're working on AT3, we've been working on maintenance, and we've asked the Pt1 supplier to come to Hong Kong to conduct an safety inspection, health and safety inspection. As per their advice, we've strengthened our system. If something happens that we find unacceptable, say for example something mentioned in the audit report, we have put in place some arrangement that if the capacity goes beyond 1,000, the system will continue to function to make the necessary calculations. So we've safeguarded the system, put in place safety arrangements to make sure that the existing system will continue to operate before it's replaced. In relation to the delay penalty, I'll defer to Mr. Wu. Before that, well, Mr. Wong has asked a very clear question. And in 2007, you asked for $1.56 billion. You exaggerated. You said that if you did not get any funding, the entire system will fall apart. But now, we're in 2015. The same system is serving Hong Kong. How much money have you spent? In 2013, with AT3 being operated, we wouldn't have to spend this much. So you have to explain. Because this is value for money audit. You came to the LegCo to ask for $1.56 billion. That's what you said. And you also asked money for an upgrading of AT1. So you have spent a lot of money. How much have you spent, and was it necessary? We're using AT1. Well, our engineers reckon that it will have a lifespan of 15 years, but it doesn't mean that it will come to a halt at the end of 15 years. It's just that maintenance and repair will be more complicated, and spare parts may not be as readily available. The continuation of the operation of the system after 15 years will be difficult. AT1 started operating in 1997, and we thought when we came for funding approval that in 2012 it would have been operating for quite some time. But if there is a delay, as I've said, that we have enhanced the safety of the existing system for it to continue to operate. But as Mr. Wong said, that you stumble. And AT3 cannot be commissioned in 2013. That's why you have to spend much more. Of course, you can keep injecting money, pumping in money to keep AT1 to operate. But if in 2013 AT3 was commissioned, then you wouldn't have spent more than necessary, because with the $1.65 billion, AT3 should have been commissioned in 2013. Can you tell us how much money have you spent to upgrade AT1? As far as I can remember, every year it will cost about $20 million to maintain AT1. Prior to that, prior to 2012, the sum was still quite substantial, and it increases by, say, the CPI. We have to replace AT1 because no matter how AT3 is developed, we have to replace AT1. And the second reason is that when we have to increase the number of air traffic controller posts, it cannot be handled by the existing system because we have already reached its maximum capacity. But with a rapid increase in aircraft movement, we reckon in 2005 and 2006 that the existing system will not be able to cope. That's why we started the project and asked for funding approval in 2007. In any event, whether AT1 can continue to operate, we need a new system. But we did not say that we would not give you money. The LegCo has already given you $1.65 billion, and you promised us that it's going to be 2013. But you made it out like we refused you funding allocation. We're now in 2015. There is a delay because you failed to make sure that it happened. Do you understand what we're asking? You think you've done right because you can still continue to use AT1 till 2015, and you're great. But the fact is that AT1 should not have been used now. You have made a mistake. AT3 is not commissioned, and you don't even know when phase 1 will complete. And you're asked about variations 1 and 2. But, well, anyway, let's move on to a different member, Alan. We're most concerned about this. The lifespan of the existing system supposed to come to an end in December 2012, and you said that some parts are worn out. It will be more difficult to maintain and repair it, and it cannot catch up with technological development. It cannot easily cope with the increase in aircraft movement. And you now say that the new system will be commissioned in the middle of 2016, so there is a delay of 3 years. And that's assuming that the new system will be commissioned. And there are still technical difficulties to be overcome. Of course, we're very concerned about that because you've spent $1.65 billion, $1.56 billion, thinking that it will be commissioned in 2012, and now there is a delay. And you don't even know when it will be commissioned. So we're trying to find out whether something has gone wrong. We have referred to the tender document, and this is the chronology. we gave the funding approval in May 2007, and the tender specification was submitted to the Government Logistics Department. I remember that when the GLD vetted the tender specification, and in 2009, 27th of November, the tender exercise started, and the director of the GLD in October 2010 explained to the chairman of the Central Tender Committee, Central Tender Board, the GLD followed the established procedure to monitor the entire flow of the tender exercise. And this is my question. If you refer to the document, that is the one that started in 27th of November 2009, in paragraph 8, there is it is about track record. There is no Chinese, so I have to use mixed language. This track record, there are a number of important points. Do our witnesses have the tender document? Yes, there is a soft copy. Never mind. I will read out the parts. Say 8, track records. It's quite strict. They have to show that there is an operation system that is being used at an air traffic control center at an airport, and 10 years prior to this, they would have had to complete the operation of an ATC system. And in paragraph 8, it also says that in the ATC center, there should be no less than 40 air traffic controllers and at least no less than 6 consecutive months and 10 years prior to the deadline of the tender exercise, they would have to have completed the following. 8.4, it says at the end, I'm sure the director of the GLD has seen it.
Proven performance record will not be considered further. 即係如果你係建議
So the proposed system without a proven track record will not be considered. First, a question for the director of the GLD, the controller of the GLD. Sorry, the director. This document has gone through the GLD. The GLD vetted it to make sure that it fulfills all the necessary requirements. And there is also this condition. I have read out 8.1 and 8.4.
處長係交報告俾個中央投標委員會。
When the director of government logistics submitted the report to in December, did the director understand that the AT3 did not have a proven track record?
操作嘅前科，咁表面上
showing its operability. So, in essence, the system didn't meet the tender documents requirement. Was the Director of Government Logistics aware of that? Director, when we considered the tender document, the interpretation was not as Mr. Ananiel put it just now. When we interpreted the tender document, we would read the last sentence of clause 8.4 together with the whole of clause 8. It will be put in context. So
就係我哋當時我哋嘅理解呢，就係我哋因為之前
now, let me just generally talk about this tender document, because at that time we discussed with the CAD and the DOJ then whether we needed the system which would be exactly the same as the previous tenderers. The outcome of the discussion at the time is that we did not need that, because if we put it that way, that would mean that for Hong Kong International Airport, there would never be any new technology being put to use. There would never be any new system. We would always be using the existing system. And even if you use the same system, modifications would be required due to different circumstances in different places and different airports. So as long as the system proposed would meet the tender documents requirements, we would not require that the system be exactly the same as any system that has been used in other jurisdictions. So that's the spirit of Clause 8. And against this backdrop, we can then look at 8.1 and 8.2, because the requirements in 8.1 and 8.2 is that reference should be available for government's consideration. So that means there should be reference sites and reference from the manufacturer. So when we look at Clause 8.4, we can then refer back to Clause 8.2. In the event that reference is available, we can ask for further information. And in doing so, if we find it unsatisfactory, or if any user of the reference site suggests that the system's specifications cannot meet the requirement stated, we can then seek further clarification from the tenderer or the reference site. And in the end, if no reference could be given to our satisfaction, that to show that this system meets our standard, we believe that we should not give this system any further consideration. So that is about reference sites in Clause 8.2, and that the information given by users of these reference sites could show whether the system is up to standard. It doesn't mean that the system should have been used in any other jurisdiction in the first place. That's our interpretation. Now, since the director is on this point, I'd like to refer to 8.1 as well, and that 8.1 should be read in the context of Clause 8. And in that clause, Annex B of the tender document is mentioned, and Annex B is mandatory requirement of the system, and that is a table. So if we look at number 3, Schedule 3A of Part 5 of the tender document. Schedule 3A is mentioned in Clause 8, and it says,
in the commissioning of one or more air traffic management systems for the purposes of air traffic control in at least one air traffic control center, as evidenced by details of reference contracts to be provided by the tenderer in Schedule 3A. The supply, installation and assistance in the commissioning under the reference contracts must have been completed within the last 10 years preceding the tender closing date. 我唔想再讀落去啦。不過呢，其實呢一啲所謂 mandatory
well, I shall not continue to read the paragraph, but as you can see, the clause is very detailed. I don't understand why. Director said that having consulted the DOJ, you could be given such a wide scope of interpretation. In fact, in the paper submitted to the Director of Government Logistics, tender invitations were sent to many. So were the 100 plus tenderers being invited aware of that? Because under E, 45 local suppliers and 43 overseas suppliers were invited. And they only read the tender document, I suppose. So altogether 88. So how could you ensure that all 88 tenderers or prospective tenderers would understand the original interpretation as Director just mentioned? Or was it that only Radium, the successful tenderer, know about that? Ms. Chang, Director. Thank you, Chairman. I think after we issued the tender document, any interested tenderer would read very carefully the specifications to see whether that system would meet these specifications. There are different stages. There are mandatory requirements and other important requirements and other requirements for assessment. So I think for tenderers, the most important thing for them was to make sure that their product or the technology that they were using could meet our requirements, because the specifications set out are in line with our procurement regulations. We would not specify which make or model to be procured, and that is why we never had this 83 in mind. And tenderers familiar with the products would understand that in order to submit their bid, they should modify their product to meet the our needs in light of our local circumstances. So it would be difficult for them to use a system that would be the same as the existing system. I don't think any system would be able to meet that requirement. Alan, Chairman. I think there is wisdom in the original tender document. If regarding AT3 and AT being air traffic, if the whole world is using AT3 only, then definitely it can not be dispensed with. But now, according to the Secretariat's information, AT3 is not very widely adopted by many airports in the world. So my understanding is that for the tender document, the wisdom is that there should be proven record. Because now it's still not yet commissioned, there are technical problems, deficiencies outstanding, and I don't think the DG could give us an exact answer that by the middle of 2016, definitely the system could be commissioned. I think even if he said so, we won't believe him, judging from past record. So that's the thinking of the tender document. Well, of course, if modification is necessary to meet the local standards, then I can understand that. But the idea of the tender document is that you already have a well-established system. And when we procure that system, we should ensure that the system could run smoothly in Hong Kong. I think for the 88 tenderers invited to submit their bids after the tender document, after reading the tender document, this should be the impression they have. Now, Director, I don't know whether this is just a matter of formality, and that if the prospective tenderers are interested, they could ask for more information. But if this is not indicated, then a tenderer may, on reading the requirement that there should be a 10-year performance record, the tenderer might decide not to submit any bid. And this is also one of the PAC's considerations. That is whether the CAD designed the tender document especially for radium. I don't know whether the FSTB has any observation. Because we have a tender system, I want to add something as well, because in Clause 8, in English it says track record. That means you should have experience before you could call it a track record. If you don't need any experience and yet you call it a track record, and then you also set out the subclauses 8.123, and then in clause 8.4 in bold, you said that without a
performance record will not be considered further. 咁你就算去解翻8嗰度，去翻你嗰個 heading。
So, reading this and going back to the heading, I don't think you can reconcile the paragraph. Director, maybe you could explain to us whether this is your way of doing things. If so, please show us some other papers that you submitted to the Central Tender Board, whether there are similar examples, whether similarly you have the requirement of proven track record, clause 8, 8.123, etc., and then towards the end of the clause, without track record, no further consideration will be given, so on and so forth. Show us something to convince us. Are there such examples that you can show us? Ask Mr. Yao. This is a system for aviation, for trains and other transport systems. It would be impossible for them to accept any system without any past record. You go and ask, say, for the Express Rail Link, would they accept a system that has never been implemented anywhere before? Well, we can go back to this point, but I note that Ms. Macy Chang just now said this. The tender document strictly complies with the relevant tender format applicable to government tenders managed by the GLD. So she is actually saying that the tender is not a tailor-made one for a tenderer. So just now I pointed out 12.6 in clause 8.4, although in bold it stipulates that any system without proven track record will not be further considered. So this is a very unequivocal sentence. So if you let the CAD do the gatekeeping job, and then the CAD later explained to the GLD in relation to 83, that the sentence in bold in clause 8.4 could not be upheld. Well, can you explain to me the time frame? When did you seek legal advice from DOJ? When did you seek advice for the purpose of giving evidence at the PAC hearing, or what was the reason for seeking advice from the DOJ director? Well, just now, in my answer, I talked about the spirit of the tender. That is, whether we would require a system submitted to be the same as any existing system in place. Now, before that, we did discuss with the CAD at the stage when the tender document was prepared. We considered whether we would need a system that is identical to another system already implemented. And we didn't consider it necessary because customization would be necessary for different airports. So it would not be practical to require a system that is identical to another. So we discussed that when we prepared the tender document. As for interpretation of the last sentence of the clause, as that is the understanding of the system in light of the spirit, and that when we read a clause, we would read it in the context of, or as we read the subclause, we read it in the context of a clause. That was our approach. As for detailed legal advice from the DOJ, as you may know, we received a complaint subsequently, and the complaint was later referred to the review panel, and the focus of the complaint was on this clause, and we then sought legal advice from the DOJ, and the DOJ shared the same view. And then the adjudicating body reviewed the whole case and upheld our views. Ellen. Chairman, I think the PAC of LegCo is concerned whether money has gone to waste. So that's from a value for money audit perspective. And even with the most optimistic estimation, there will be a delay of more than or 3.5 years before the system can be commissioned, with an allocation of $1.56 billion. We'd like to know why they are unable to hand in their assignment.
They've commissioned Raytheon to do the job, and now a lot of problems have been discussed. Well, the chairman mentioned 204 items, 384 items, etc., etc. Problems with the acceptance test, etc. So let's look at the bold types. Look at the wisdom therein. Mr. Chairman, look at the chronology of events. It's in April 2009 that the tenders were submitted to the GLD. When the tendering period ended is the 8th of December 2010. Grant of contract, February 2011. Just now, I randomly carried out a Google search. This Google search tells me that in 2010, on the 9th of December, the Director of Government Logistics, 2 months before submitting the result to the Central Tender Board, the tendering exercise ended. And there we have this piece of news about New Delhi in India. The Auto Track 3 system used in that Indian airport, which is now the focus of this hearing. Well, I think this is not false news. It's a piece of appalling news. The Prime Minister, Mr. Cameron of the UK, visited India in July. This Auto Track 3 software within that year broke down thrice. That is 3 times. I understand that the DG and government officials will tell me that they had written a letter to the relevant body in Delhi and were told that there are no problems. Well, I've not read that letter. What questions did they ask in that letter? Did they particularly mention those news reports? Apparently, these news reports were very real. Mr. Chairman, in this public hearing, we see that they spent $700,000 or $800,000. It's $780,000. All right, $780,000 to visit different airports in the world to inspect the operation of the software and hardware of AT3. Well, after all those inspections, they picked AT3 provided by Raytheon. As I pointed out just now, before the granting of the contract, in less than half a year's time, the local newspapers of New Delhi in India reported so. Well, I've not read that letter from the CAD to the Civil Aviation Authorities. 27th of January, 10th of February, 28th of July, and the 29th of October. Right, so these are no secrets. As I said, I just carried out a Google search and discovered all these. Now, I've not read that letter from our CAD to their aviation authorities. Did they read the reports from Mumbai newspapers, Delhi newspapers. David Cameron visited Delhi, but then the aircraft disappeared from the radar system. You see, that was rather shocking, because it will be very alarming if the Prime Minister's aircraft could disappear from the radar screen. Why is it that without substantiated track records, they still picked Raytheon? Can anybody explain to the PAC? DG, any information before that letter? Why did you write that letter? Or Director of Government Logistics. I mean, the letter dated the 8th of December to the CTB. Well, before that letter, any record of any happenings? Well, Mr. Chairman, I think we need to understand the chronology of events in 2010, 2011. Now we know that India and Dubai used the system. Of course, you're able to find this from Google. Yet, back then, we vetted the tenders in 2010. As far as we understand, at that time, that is 2010, India and Dubai were testing the system, which was not formally commissioned. For the GOD, we did not know that Dubai and India were testing the system. We did not have that piece of information. As we did not have that piece of information, we had not carried out any Google search. When did we know that? It's at the end of February 2011. The PAC also has this piece of information. Somebody wrote articles about this issue, and we then knew that Dubai and India had the system. But at that time, the contract was already awarded to the successful tenderer. During the vetting period, we did not have the information, so we would not carry out any online search on whether or not the system was being tested anywhere or somewhere. In the tendering documents, we asked the 5 tenderers to, at the time of submitting their tenders, submit reference sites to us. So at that time, we focused on the information about the operations submitted by those 5 tenderers in relation to the reference sites. We did not refer to any system being tested at that time. During the vetting process, we did not know who would win the contract. So we did not look into the systems being tested. Otherwise, we would have asked the 5 tenderers whether or not any system was being tested, because we then asked for reference sites that had at least operated for 5 months. So that's in 2010. Oh, yes, we understand that. We're also looking at 2010. We're looking at the information available in 2010. Mr. Alan Leong referred to news about Delhi in India, and then in 2010, the Airport Authority of India cancelled the 83 in Calcutta in India. So you did have a responsibility here, because you're talking about $1.5 billion. You could not just close your eyes and grant the contract. As you pointed out and wrote out very clearly, you asked for reference sites that had been commissioned for at least 6 months. We're not querying you. We just want you to tell us why you had acted so. Well, if you consider that we shouldn't be asking for such information, we can consider your response. But now we're asking you about 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, and 8.4. It doesn't matter. Just tell us, when did you start to look at specific proven performance? When did you start to follow that spirit? The CAD explained to us that proven performance did not mean what you just told us. Well, just read the Hansard. They said it's because they had to adopt Pt1. Well, please take out the Hansard for them. So please read the Hansard. I think what the CAD said was slightly different from what you told us just now. You told us the spirit of the law, of the letter. Why is it that we have to ask you after asking them? Just now, your explanation was different from our understanding. That's why we'll have to ask you why. Alan? Yes, Mr. Chairman, I understand that I've exceeded my time limit, but I have to follow up on this. Mr. Chairman, you also have received this document classified as restricted with information covered. Items 6 and 7. Well, I really don't know how I should refer those pages to you because I don't have any pagination here. There it is said that in February 2011, when CAT granted the contract to them, Autocrat 3 was not operating in Dubai and India. Therefore, before the granting of the contract, CAT did not consult the airports in Dubai and India. Besides, in strict accordance with the vetting procedures, questionnaires were issued to the reference site submitted by the tenderers, asking for opinion on the proposed systems. Now, Mr. Chairman, one very important viewpoint here is that before the granting of the contract, now this contract is very expensive, $1.565 billion. With this particular contract is $480 million, but the whole contract is $1.565 billion. Now, have they exercised due diligence? Now, there is this phenomenon that the Director of Government Logistics is not an expert. In accordance with the procurement policy of the government, as adopted for tender documents, in terms of format, workflow, and so forth, she vetted the 8 contracts put up for tender by the CAD. Now, Director of Government Logistics, when it comes to the appropriateness of the system in question, you have to rely on the user department concerned, right? That is the experts, and this time the experts in CAD, to offer you expert advice, right? Now, as you say here, for the vetting panel, most members are senior officers of the CAD. So is my understanding correct? Director of Government Logistics When it comes to the professional aspects, the user department will be the gatekeeper. You only observe the procurement policy of the government, the operational workflow, the operational imagination, so to speak, etc. When you served as the gatekeeper. Well, may I defer your questions because Paul has to leave earlier. Paul? Well, it doesn't matter. I'm also very interested in the line of questions asked by Mr. Alan Leong. That's a very important line. So maybe I should continue with that effort. Director of Government Logistics, can you answer Mr. Leong's questions? Ms. Cheng? Yes, Mr. Leong's understanding is correct. In the whole tendering exercise, we, of course, had to totally respect the professional judgment of the CAD in terms of the professional aspects. Now, usually for the whole tendering exercise, we have to have TAP, that is Tender Assessment Panel. We have to form such a panel. And you can see that on the 8th of December. And the panel comprises experts from the CAD, totally from the CAD. They had to consider whether or not the tenderers were up to professional standards. So you're correct. Professionally, we had to rely on the CAD. So what's our role? Our role is a rather neutral one. We looked at the whole procurement process, whether or not it complies with established principles. We do have rules and regulations about procurement of materials. So we do have standards to follow. So we're the gatekeeper in that regard. Paul? To follow up on that reply, well, she mentioned general principles. But what about the word must or mandatory? How do you understand these terms? Director? Mr. Chairman, for a general understanding of these terms, now if a term is very crucial, particularly those terms which are crucial to success or failure in a tendering exercise, as the contract and the tendering documents are legal documents in general, will consult the Department of Justice. Well, in paragraph 8, you see these words must, mandatory, proposed system with no previous performance will not be considered, etc., etc. So did a red light light up? Where did you draw the line? Because I'm concerned that you as the gatekeeper may have your own interpretation of these terms. CAD has its own interpretation of these terms. The tenderers have their own interpretation of these terms. In a previous event, we discovered that in the tendering document, there's no vetting at all. Director, everything in paragraph 8 is important. When the CAD received the reference sites from the tenderers, procedures adopted for those factories covered by paragraph 8.2 and so forth, we did pay attention to those details. If they want our opinion on any particular aspect, we're more than willing to provide our views to them. So in 8.1, 8.2, and 8.4, we did look at the whole process, and procedurally we did offer our advice to them. What about those tenderers who are very eager to win the contract? For those who have insider knowledge, they might know that by must, there's actually leeway and flexibility. By mandatory, there might also be room for maneuver. So for the good tenderers, these terms are very rigid, but for the bad tenderers, their understanding might be that there would be flexibility and leeway. Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't quite understand the question.
We follow the terms of the tender document. We treat every tenderer seriously, and we think that they will deal with the tender exercise as seriously. Well, for serious tenderers, if they see these obstacles, they will know that they are going to fail. But for those with insider information, they know that with words like must or mandatory, there is actually leeway. They are there to discourage people who have no insider information or those who are not persistent. If you keep saying mandatory and must without adhering to them, then it's useless. And we will have to look back to see if you've been unfair to the numerous tenderers in previous tender exercises. Director. We deal with a lot of tender documents. We are experienced. When it comes to WTO compliant tender exercises, we have to abide by all the rules. I don't understand what Mr. Zhe says. We don't have information that there are people who are discouraged and there are people who had insider information. We deal with the tender document seriously, and we think that all tenderers are serious in submitting their proposals. The GLD can't possibly be conversant with all the different expertise in these tender documents. What we look at is whether it complies with the procurement regulations, say for example whether it's too cumbersome, too verbose, and whether the rules of the games are clearly set out. And whether something is missing, some items are missing in the score sheet. We follow the procurement regulations to make sure that the tender exercise is fair and will not stifle competition. Paul? Okay, after the general principle, I'll ask the specifics. In this tender document, if you have the record or if you can recollect it, were there any interested parties who have asked for information or asked questions about number 8 or paragraph 8? Well, my colleagues will have a better recollection than I do, because I've only joined this department in the past 2 years. 2 years ago, they said no, but there was one who asked for a delay. Well, what I meant was before the tender exercise closes, any interested parties ask questions about paragraph 8. Perhaps I will defer to my colleague, Mr. Yip. As far as I can recollect, there is none. I can go back to reconfirm. That time when someone asked for a delay, well, that was not asked in passing of an inquiry. It's just that well, they had to set aside more time to give the quotations. The terms are quite harsh, and if they don't have a track record in the past 10 years, they will think, well, let's not do it. Because, say, for example, my law firm, when we saw some harsh terms, we simply would not submit a proposal in the first place. But for those who had insider information, I'll elaborate further, or those who want to just muddle through, or those who think that, well, actually there is some elbow room, then they would continue to submit their proposals, because we're talking about a small market. The people who drafted the tender document, is there someone called Mr. X or Peter Leung? Is there a record? We don't have the information, not in the GLD. Paul? The answer is no such record. No such record in our department. What about the CAD? Or anyone? Mr. Wu, please take this question. Mr. Wu or Mr. Lee, because one is a project manager, the other one is the designer of this tender document. DG, I will defer to Mr. Wu. Thank you. There was a team that's responsible for the replacement of this ATMS project. A colleague was in this project team. He's very experienced because he's been with us since Kai-Tak. He's a member of the project team. He's a project team. He's from the project team, and he's responsible for drafting the tender document. Is that right? Mr. Wu? If you're not clear, maybe you'll refer to the record. I remember that he's one of the participants. Sorry, your answer is not clear. I will have to ask for more specific. You said he's participated, so this and his team has an understanding about where there are elbow rooms and what is the actual meaning of mandatory and must. Is that right? Mr. Wu? There was division of labor. By that I mean, for colleagues with operational background or experience, they will be involved in writing the specifications about operations. For those who are familiar with drafting of tender documents, or they've been responsible for project management, they would liaise with the GLD to work on a condition of tender or condition of contract. So for 8.1, 8.4, I don't think he's involved. You think? Maybe please check. Give us papers setting out which team or board in which he has participated and the extent of his involvement. Paul, an hypothetical question, if he's part of the project team, he is also responsible for managing the tender document. If it's found later that he is related to local supplier of the contractor or the contractor, would you realize that there will be more to consider, just like what the directors, unlike what the director said that she didn't know. Well, maybe it was too long. Well, for someone who's responsible for drafting, explaining the tender document, they will have a better understanding about the actual meaning of mandatory or must, and if they are in some way related to the contractor or the supplier, would you find that unusual? Mr. Wu, you may give us a written answer if you can't supply one now. Would you like to do that? DG? We can't verify this. I mean, what Mr. Zhe said. Let's go back to go through the documents. Yes, I'm willing to give them time. While you're at it, do you know an engineering company called Chinney, Chinney? Can you answer the question now? I myself have heard of this name, but as to whether this company is related, if so, to colleagues of the CAD, that I don't know. Let me ask, in the contract, there is something about 6 months of testing or acceptance. Why not 12? Why 6 months? Mr. Wu, you're responsible for the tender document. For AT1, in the tender document, it says 12 months. Mr. Wu, why is it changed to 6? Is that what you're asking, Paul? It's quite a significant change. You know what I'm talking about? It's 8.1. In AT1, for the requirements, if you refer to the tender document of AT1, there is no specification about the length of time when the system has been in operation. Anyway, we asked the tenderer to supply the information if they have any information about operability or serviceability. This is not an indispensable element in the tender assessment. Well, back to my question, is there a good reason why it's changed from 12 months to 6 months? Why not 12 months? Because over a period of year, then you know the average over the year. If it's 6 months, then there is a seasonal factor. You may only know about spring and summer, but not autumn or winter. Have you taken that into consideration? Wouldn't you have considered this a valid reason? As Mr. Wu said, in the Pt1 tender document, there is no requirement of 12 months of operation. What we ask for is that if they had the information, they may supply the information to us for our reference. In Pt3, we only ask for 6 months. It's not the case that they can choose not to supply the information. They really have to have the system in place operating for 6 months, compared to 12 months for an ATC system. It operates in a safe and weatherproof condition. So whether it is summer, winter, the reliability and the operability is not affected. Of course, during inclement weather, controllers may do things differently, but they have been tested during the acceptance test, because we have tested the function and operability in the different seasons. Well, when you ask for information, then you use the information to serve as indicators. Well, in Hong Kong, we have a very marked seasonality. In summer here, we have typhoon and we have heavy rains. So it's very different. Since you asked for the information, why did you not ask for 12 months? Apart from the weather, there is also high season and low season. That's only common knowledge. That's only common sense. Since you asked for it, why not ask for all of it? We test for many things, complicated matters about the function and whether the system meets our requirements. Basically, we test for all the requirements of the 4 seasons and the high and low density, and how the system copes with that. Perhaps the DG doesn't understand me. Not talking about tests. You ask for information about actual operation in an actual place. 6 months. And I asked you, why did you not ask for 12 months? DG, perhaps I'll ask you. In Pt1, it's not mandatory, but you ask the tenderers to supply information of 12 months. And now, in this tender document, it's changed to 6 months. Why did you ask for 12 and now 6? Well, you may say that you now have more experience, but it's about the procurement of a system. So tenderer B, do they have information about 12 months? Please answer me. About the 6 months requirement. Now, I think that we are talking about a reliability or stability of a complicated system. My colleagues have spoken to me about this. As far as I know, the reliability of 6 months or 12 months, actually we have an idea about the reliability with only 6 months. And when it comes to the 4 seasons, so you don't need 12 months, you only need 6. But is there a downside to get 12 months? Is it because you were more dumb? That's why in the past you asked for 12, and now you've learned, you've wised up, so that's why you only asked for 6?
Because it has to do with tenderer B, which did not have 12 months record. So we're asking you whether the situation was this, because this is the picture presented to us. Well, whether it's 6 months or 12 months, perhaps I'll defer to Mr. Wu. Mr. Wu, you are the author of the tender document. He even got promoted because of his creation. So this tender document is your creation. Never mind about promotion. Do explain to us why instead of 12 months you put down 6 months. Well, as said just now, if you read Pt1's tender document and the tender assessment, as mentioned just now, a record of 12 months is not a prerequisite. That's the first point. Secondly, I think, let me put it this way. From another perspective, if, say, you had tenderer B in mind, then in fact, tenderer B system only commissioned in India in April 2011. Yes, it was after the tendering process. So when was the assessment done? 2010. So tenderer B system was implemented only on the 11th of April 2011. That's very clear because you're asking us to memorize this. It'd be, well, tender closing, we're talking about February 2010. So half a year ago, all tenderers should have a system with proven record. But according to clause 8.1, well, let me ask you this way. Clause 8.3 of the contract, referring back to your contract, 8.3, was all the information provided according to 8.3 for your assessment? Just now, Ms. Chang walked us through 8.1, 8.2, and talking about 8.3 now. Did you go through all the information submitted according to 8.3? I think we need a break. Well, let's answer this question after the break. Well, if you don't mind, Chairman, I'd like to spend a few more minutes to ask another question. I think we have our own observation. Anyway, let me ask another question. At the time when you invited to tender, you estimated that the service lifespan of AT1 would end at the end of 2011. So at that time was of essence. That was what's in your mind, is that right? I'll defer to Mr. Hui to take your question. Thank you. Chairman, thank you, member, for your question. In the tender document, there is a schedule setting out the whole time frame, and this is one of the mandatory requirements under 8.1, and that the tenderer must be able to fulfill this before we move on to the remaining stages, that is assessment of compliance with mandatory requirements. So this is an important requirement, and it's also provided in the tender document. So any tenderer must be able to meet that in order to reach stage 2. So that means late submission would mean a penalty. You have this penalty clause, right? Yes. So if time is of essence, and as we emphasized just now, and it's a mandatory requirement, why did you reduce the level of penalty from 15 to 1.5%. It's just 1/10. So, be it a $1.56 billion tender project or some $500 million involved, why are you reducing the level of penalty? Who could take this question? In my recollection, daily cost loss, or the penalty would be $50,000 per day. This clause had been considered by the GLD as well, and in the event of non-implementation, the penalty would exceed the contract sum. So I'd like the Director General to look at this. Now, why was it that for AT1 the level of compensation is 15%, but now it's 1.5% only? Director of Government Logistics, well, we are venturing into commercially sensitive area, so I'll try to answer the question to the best I can. Now, Director, before you answer, please consider this. We're not forcing you to answer. But if you don't answer, give an answer to our satisfaction, we may ask for more information. I don't want you to feel compelled to answer our question if commercial sensitive information is involved. Now, for a large project, when we discuss compensation, for a project of a large scale, we will consider matters relating to compensation. Just now the question was what? Reducing the level of compensation from 15 to 1.5%. Well, in considering this, we asked the CAD to conduct a risk assessment, and we considered that. We also considered the DOJ's advice before we set a sum. And the sum is not in fact worse than that of AT1. Now, we won't disclose the name, but at the time when the officer, Mr. X, drafted the tender document, well, you would also consult their views, is that right? Well, Director, why don't you give us some papers? I'm sorry, Chairman. Sorry, my answer was somewhat inaccurate. Maybe I'll ask Mr. Yip to clarify this answer. Yes, please rectify the answer, the incorrect answer. I want to say that liquidated damage. Yes, that's liquidated damage, LD. That's a penalty involving an actual sum, and the sum is set smaller than last time because we asked the CAD and we discussed with the DOJ, and the DOJ's advice is that when we set the LD, it should be based on the estimated loss per day, and that it should be set at a percentage. Last time it was set at a fixed sum, but according to the DOJ's advice, it should be set according to the actual loss per day because of the delay. So the advice was to set it at as an actual sum. So the CAD's advice, in essence, is that it's very important. Yes. Well, I'd like to follow up on the other point as well. It may not be fair to Mr. Wu. Mr. Yip, so about CAD's economic loss, when the CAD applied for funding approval in 2007, they said that the existing AT1 would see its end of its service life in the end of 2012, and that's why $1.56 billion was approved then for implementation of the air traffic management system. And the system's implementation would affect the whole economy, because imagine flight movements had very much to do with our local economy. It's not just a matter of the loss of the department. Can you give us some data on why you would reduce the level from 15% to 1.5% for important information or sensitive information? It can be obliterated, but it's really hard to accept the drop from 15 to 1.5%. What about annual maintenance? And the more we continue to use, the longer we continue to use AT1, the more loss we will suffer. So, and this is public money. And we'd like to know the cost for extending the operation of the AT1 before we could assess the drop from 15 to 1.5. Chairman, I'd like to make a correction. I mentioned Peter Young is actually Peter Leung. Yes, it's been corrected. Can we have a 15-minute break? Let's have a break. Thank you.